This is LSAT PrepTest 142, Section 3, Passage 1. This is a humanities passage about perfume as an underappreciated art form. It's a pretty low difficulty passage. The author's opinion is straightforward from the first paragraph, and they never waver on it. Now, this is a straight advocacy piece. The author believes perfume making is a legitimate art equal to painting, music, any of it, and that the world hasn't caught up to that fact. And every paragraph here serves that one idea. Now, the most important paragraph is the second one. That is where the author builds a detailed, deliberate parallel between how painters work and how perfumers work. So the LSAT is going to make questions built around that comparison, so you got to understand how all of this functions. Now, paragraph 1 is a warm-up. The author lists all the effort that goes into judging visual art, like curators, collectors, dealers, scholars, critics, and then they flip it. They ask, why doesn't smell get the same treatment? And of course, they're not curious about that. It's more of a complaint. The author already knows the answer. So they're giving you tone here. It's not about the content. They're telling you where the author stands before the argument even starts. Then paragraph 2 is where the work happens. The author says the link between perfume and painting ought to be regarded as undeniable. Ought to be means other people don't see it yet. The author is correcting a blind spot, not reporting a consensus. And then you get a step-by-step walkthrough of how painters build up a canvas with pigments, oils, layers of underpainting, thin glazes on top. And then right after that, the author describes how perfumers do essentially the same thing with scent. And so that is a deliberate structure. It's not two separate descriptions. It's one process described twice to make them look identical. Now, the details about linseed oil and poppy oil don't matter. The author is matching the two crafts move for move. That is the point. Then paragraph 3 raises the stakes. Paragraph 2 was about process. Paragraph 3 is about impact. Talented perfumers, and the author calls them noses, produce combinations that hit you emotionally, like sweet, bitter, melancholy, happy. But then the author goes bigger. A perfumer can create an imaginary world no less powerful or intimate than what a composer or a painter creates. And that is the strongest claim in the passage. And then right after that, the author ties it to memory and childhood experience, then says perfumers are in the same business as artists who create the illusion of life on canvas. So if you skimmed this paragraph and only caught the list of emotions, you want to go back. The bottom of paragraph 3 is where the author stops comparing and starts equating, and that is more important than anything in paragraph 2. Then paragraph 4 changes direction. Now the author explains why perfume does not get the recognition it deserves. Large corporations control production. They substitute cheap synthetic compounds for quality ingredients, and they don't tell customers. And so fine perfume gets swallowed up by cosmetics marketing. This paragraph answers the question from paragraph 1. Why isn't perfume taken seriously? Because the industry itself has hollowed it out. So read this, understand the cause, but don't let it hijack your sense of what the passage is about. This is one paragraph out of 4. It is a supporting explanation, not the main event. Now, the key move here is the parallel structure in paragraph 2, painting process, then perfume process described in matching terms. That is the fuel of the entire argument. Now, every question about purpose or structure will trace back to it. Now, the author thinks perfume is real art, full stop. The trap is treating the corporate criticism in paragraph 4 as the main point, but it's not. It's the explanation for a problem. The main point is that perfume deserves artistic respect. A student who walks away thinking this passage is primarily an attack on corporations will pick the wrong answer for any main point question. The corporate angle is the why it matters. The core argument is the art comparison. Now, I want to share here one more thing you want to watch for. The author draws from multiple art forms like painting, music, and composition. So don't narrow the comparison down to just painting. The passage says perfumers belong alongside composers and painters. If an answer choice limits the claim to one art form when the author meant several, that is a distortion. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to check yourself on these three things. First, why does the author describe the physical process of oil painting in so much detail? Second, what is the difference between what paragraph 2 proves and what paragraph 3 proves? And finally, who does the author blame for perfume's low status? And is it the public or is it the industry? So that was passage 1. We're going to go on now to passage number 2. Just give me 1 second to get set up here. All right, we're going to dive into the next one. This is LSAT PrepTest 142, section 3, passage number 2. The topic is stealing thunder. This is the courtroom move where a lawyer reveals their own bad news before the other side can. Difficulty is fairly low. The passage is a pretty straightforward read, but the ending sets a trap. Now, this is a social science passage. The author is building a case that stealing thunder works, stacking up psychological reasons why, and then yanking the rug out at the very end with a limitation. And that last move is what the test cares about the most. The most important moment in this passage is the final few sentences of the last paragraph. Everything before it pushes in one direction, then the author reverses. If you cruise through the ending, you're going to pick a wrong answer on the main point question. Now, paragraph 1 is pure setup. Here is the strategy and the logic. If your weakness is coming out anyway, you should volunteer at first so it doesn't hit as hard. Nothing clever here. Read it, understand the definition, and then keep moving. Paragraph 2 is where the author starts stacking the deck. First, there is research, simulated trials. Back up on that one a little bit. Paragraph 2 is where the author starts stacking the deck. First, there's research, simulated trials showing the technique works across a broad range of situations. Then comes the psychology. Volunteering bad information makes you look credible. People treat evidence that cuts against your own side as being more believable. And stealing thunder takes the surprise away from the opposition's case, so their big reveal lands flat. Now, there is one more layer here that's easy to skim past. The author brings in a scarcity idea. A persuasive message is worth more when it feels rare. So when both sides end up presenting the same damaging evidence, it starts to feel like old news and lose its punch. That is a specific mechanism. Don't blur it together with the credibility point they're doing different work. But here is what matters about paragraph 2 as a whole. It's all going in one direction. Every sentence is another reason that stealing thunder is a smart move. Your job is to notice that pattern without getting buried in the individual examples. You want to move through this steadily. The details are supporting evidence, not the argument itself. Now, paragraph 3 starts by continuing that same positive push. A lawyer can frame negative information on their own terms. They can put a spin on it. They can soften it. So far, they're still building up here. But then you hit the word however. Pay attention to that word. The author says, this framing trick only works when the negative info can actually be spun positively. That is the first crack. Right after that, you get the psychological explanation for why framing works. Jurors who hear positive information and framing early latch onto it. They use it as a filter for everything that comes next. And so early good framing locks in a favorable lens. And that sounds great for stealing thunder. But the very last part of the passage flips that same mechanism against you. When the damaging info is severe, volunteering it early creates a negative first impression. Now, jurors filter everything through that negative lens instead. So the exact same psychology that helps you in mild cases destroys you in bad ones, and that is your key move. It's one mechanism with two opposite outcomes. The difference is how bad the information is. Now, the pattern running through this passage is an escalating setup and reversal. The author spends most of the passage making stealing thunder look like a no-brainer, and every paragraph adds more support. Then, in the final sentences, one qualification cuts through the entire thing. It undercuts it not completely, but enough to change the main point. Here is what the author actually thinks. Stealing thunder is a real, psychologically grounded strategy that works in many cases. But it has a built-in ceiling. When the news is bad enough, the same psychology flips and makes it backfire. Now, here is what most students get wrong. They remember the buildup and forget the pullback. And so when they see a main point answer that says stealing thunder is effective and is supported by research, full stop, no qualifier, it looks perfect. But the correct answer will account for both sides. It'll mention the support and the limitation. So if your answer choice is all sunshine, it's wrong. Now, before you go to the questions, check yourself on three things. First, can you name at least two different psychological reasons the passage gives for why stealing thunder works? Second, what is the core one condition that makes stealing thunder backfire? And third, why does the same psychological mechanism produce opposite results depending on the situation? So that was passage number 2. This is LSAT PrepTest 142, Section 3, Passage 3. This is a comparative or dual passage set about free will, neuroscience, and criminal punishment. Medium difficulty set. The trap here is pretty subtle. Both passages accept the same science, but they fight about what it means. Now, don't read this set as being about science versus philosophy, because that's going to mess you up on every relationship question. Both passages take the neuroscience seriously. The split is about the one word free. They define the word free differently, and that one difference changes everything. Now, passage A moves in a straight line. You are your brain. Nothing else causes your behavior. That is the opening punch, and the rest of the passage just follows the consequences. If the brain runs everything, then what happens to the law? The law assumes you make free, rational choices. But brain scans show moral decisions firing in emotional centers, not deliberative ones. And so that assumption is in trouble. Now, here is where passage A pushes hardest. If people are not freely choosing their actions, retribution makes no sense. You can't punish somebody for a choice they didn't really make, so drop retribution and shift to deterrence, maybe even go lighter on punishments. You want to read passage A at a steady pace. It is one argument moving in one direction, no twists. The thing to track is the chain. Neuroscience kills free choice. Dead free choice kills retribution. Dead retribution means deterrence is all you've got left. Every link depends on the one before it. Now, passage B is where you've got to slow down. It's longer, and it's doing something sneaky. It also accepts that the brain causes behavior. Same starting point as passage A. But instead of following that to the conclusion that free will is dead, it brings in air and soft determinism. Soft determinism is the idea that free will and determinism aren't enemies, they can coexist. Now here is the key distinction Ayer draws. He splits actions across two buckets. Free actions come from internal sources, your own will operating normally. Constrained actions come from outside, somebody forcing you, a disorder hijacking your brain, kleptomania, hypnosis. The question is never whether an action was caused. Everything is caused. The question is where the cause lives. Internal cause, free action. External cause, not free. So that distinction dismantles passage A's entire argument. Passage A says, brain causes behavior, therefore no free will. Passage B says, brain causing behavior is free will. That is exactly what a free action looks like. A healthy brain doing its thing with nobody forcing it from outside. So same facts, opposite conclusions, all because of how they define one word. Now, right at the end of passage B, there is a move that's easy to blow past. Ayer himself never talked about brains. He was a philosopher in 1954. But the author of passage B extends Ayer's logic to neuroscience. Actions from a disease-free brain are internally caused. And so under Ayer's test, they're free, even though they're determined. And that last stretch is the author making an argument, not just summarizing Ayer. And so if you miss that shift, you're going to get tripped up on any question asking whose view is being expressed. Now, the most important paragraph is the one laying out Ayer's free versus constrained distinction. That is where the test writers build their hardest questions. If you understand that distinction cold, you can answer almost anything they throw at you, but if you're fuzzy on it, you'll second guess yourself on every question. Now, here is the main trap. Students will read passage B and think it's rejecting neuroscience, but it's not. It's rejecting passage A's conclusion. The science is fine. The leap from brains cause things to free will doesn't exist is what passage B refuses to make. So any answer choice that frames passage B as being anti-science is wrong. Now, before you touch the questions, check yourself on these three things. First, why does passage A think brain-caused behavior eliminates free will? Second, why does passage B think brain-caused behavior is perfectly compatible with free will? And third, Where exactly does passage B's author stop reporting error and start making their own case? So that was passage 3. This is LSAT Prep Test 142, Section 3, Passage 4. This is a book review of Mario Garcia's study of the Mexican-American generation, political activists from 1930 to 1960. Medium difficulty passage. It's structured around 2 criticisms, and they test differently. If you blur them together, you're going to get tripped up. Now, this is a humanities passage. The reviewer is picking apart Garcia's book, not trashing it, but poking 2 specific holes in the argument. Now, paragraph 1 does 2 things. First, it lays out Garcia's claim. These activists were more radical and more politically diverse than earlier historians realized, and they anticipated the Chicano reforms of the 60s and 70s. And the reviewer actually gives Garcia some credit here. That phrase, persuasive evidence, is real praise. Don't skip past it. But then the paragraph ends with a sharp turn. They say, his study suffers from 2 flaws. So that sentence is your table of contents for the rest of the passage. Everything after it is organized around flaw 1 and flaw 2. You want to read paragraph 1 at a normal speed, but that final sentence is the most important one to lock in on. Now, paragraph 2 covers flaw number 1, and it's the meatier of the 2. Garcia claims this generation was politically diverse, but the reviewer catches him in a contradiction. Garcia keeps emphasizing an underlying consensus among these groups. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say they were diverse, then argue they mostly agreed. And the reviewer backs this up with specifics. On one side, you've got the League of United Latin American Citizens pushing assimilation into the mainstream. On the other side, the Congress of Spanish-speaking people fighting for bilingual education and immigrant rights. And those are not minor differences, they are opposite strategies. And the reviewer says Garcia sees these differences but calls them insignificant. So that shows Garcia is actively dismissing his own evidence. And then the reviewer goes further. The debates over immigration policy and assimilation versus cultural preservation were not polite disagreements. The reviewer uses the phrase fierce controversies. And that is strong language for an academic review. The whole point is that Mexican-American political history since 1930 has been defined by conflict, not consensus. Now, you don't need to memorize the organization names here. They are just examples. The point is to prove that diversity was real, and Garcia's own book shows it even while he downplays it. Then paragraph 3 is flaw number 2. That one works differently. Here, the reviewer questions whether these activists actually represented the broader Mexican-American population. And Garcia's logic goes like this. By 1930, more Mexican Americans were born in the US, more assimilated, more politically active. They experienced discrimination and were influenced by World War II rhetoric, so they pushed for civil rights. And that chain of reasoning might sound solid, but that is exactly the trap. The review doesn't say it's wrong, they say it's not proven. So there is a gap between saying these leaders were active and they represented everybody. There were too many other variables like patterns of bilingualism, immigration rates, naturalization numbers, variations in ethnic identity. So the reviewer is saying Garcia jumped from a demographic trend to a political conclusion without adequate support for that. Now you want to slow down here because the difference between saying this is wrong versus this is not proven is exactly what the test is going to ask about. So their tone here in paragraph 3 is skeptical, it's not dismissive. Now here is the key move. In both criticisms, the reviewer turns Garcia's own evidence against him. That is the pattern running through the whole passage. The reviewer is not bringing in any outside research. They are not citing other scholars. Every hit lands using Garcia's own data. Flaw number 1, Garcia's examples prove diversity, which undercuts his consensus claim. Flaw number 2, Garcia's demographics don't actually support the conclusion he draws from them. It is a very specific style of critique. It's saying, basically, your own book disagrees with you. Now, the reviewer respects Garcia's project. That part is easy to miss. The early praise in this passage is genuine. The main trap is reading this as a demolition. It's not. The review is saying the book has real strengths, but the argument does not hold together in 2 places. If you overcorrect and read the reviewer as being hostile, You're going to pick answers that are too negative on any attitude question. Now, before you go on to the questions, check yourself on three things. First, can you state both flaws in your own words without blending them together? Second, why does the reviewer list specific organizations in paragraph 2? Not what they did, but why do they mention them? And then third, in paragraph 3, is the reviewer saying Garcia's data is bad or that his conclusion goes too far? Those are very different answers, and you could bet the questions are going to offer you both in the choices. So that was passage number 4. We're going to go on now to test number 139. Just getting set up for that. 1 second, please. All right, this is LSAT PrepTest 139, Section 3, Passage 1, about Booker T. Whatley and Booker T. Whatley's plan for profitable small farming. It's a low difficulty passage, but the mistakes here are just a bit more subtle. That's what makes it relatively easier overall. Now, this is a social science passage that does one thing. It presents one person's proposal step by step. There is no opposition voice, no saying however critics argue. It's just Whatley's blueprint. And that is exactly what makes it tricky. Students expect a turn that never comes, and they start inventing a conflict that is not on the page. Now, the most important part of this passage is the opening. You want to read this at full speed, but register what it's doing. It's giving you the problem. Agriculture has shifted toward massive, mechanized, debt-heavy production, and that shift is driving small farms into bankruptcy. Then it drops in Whatley. He is an African-American horticulturalist, that's a word I don't say a whole lot, horticulturist who says small farms can still work. And everything after that is him explaining how. Now, if you miss that setup, you're going to treat the rest of the passage like a random list of farming tips, but it's not. Every recommendation Whatley makes is a direct answer to the problem in that opening. Now, the middle of the passage is where you've got most of the content, but it's easy to zone out here. But Whatley is stacking up several specific recommendations, and each one solves a particular problem. He says to grow at least 10 crops, because if you only grow one thing and it fails, you're toast. 10 crops means a year-round cash flow and built-in insurance against a bad season. Then he introduces the clientele membership club, and that is the centerpiece of the whole plan. Customers pay upfront for the right to come to the farm and pick their own produce. And this guarantees the farmer has a market before a single seed goes into the ground. It wipes out harvesting costs because the customers do the picking. It kills distribution costs because there's no middleman, no truck, no supermarket taking a cut. And Whatley gets specific here. He says harvesting eats up half of all production costs. So when customers do that work, the farmer can charge 60% of supermarket prices and still turn a profit. And so that math is the core of the whole proposal. If a question asks why Whatley's plan is supposed to be economically viable, the answer runs through that math. And then the passage shifts to a location. Whatley says the farm needs to be on a hard surface road within 40 miles of a city of at least 50,000. He wants a clientele membership club of about 1,000 people, mostly from urban areas. Now he flips the usual phrase farm to market roads and calls them city to farm roads. And so that's telling you the whole direction of his thinking. He's not worried about shipping product out. He's designing a system that pulls consumers in. Then the passage closes with a few more practical requirements like good soil, water, drought-resistant crops, liability insurance. And that is basically just a checklist. You could speed up here. They're just showing you that Whatley has thought through the logistics. Then the last sentence zooms out and says this approach can let small farms be a real alternative to corporate agriculture. Now, the key move here is the membership club and the economic chain it creates. Prepayment removes hard market risk. Self-harvesting cuts production costs in half. Direct sales cut out distribution. So each piece knocks out a cost that normally crushes small farmers. And the hardest questions will test whether you see how these parts lock together. Now, the author's stance here is neutral to maybe positive. The passage is presenting Whatley's ideas with zero pushback, which you could read as being at least mild endorsement, but don't go any further than that. The author is not calling the plan revolutionary or proven or guaranteed to work. They're just reporting it as a credible proposal. Now, the main trap here is picking choices that frame the passage as being a debate between small farming and corporate farming, but there's no debate here. There's no opposing voice. This is just a proposal, not an argument. So any answer that says the author is critiquing industrial agriculture or comparing two systems has gone beyond what the passage is actually doing. Now, before you hit the questions, check yourself on these three things. First, why does Whatley recommend 10 crops instead of specializing? Second, what three costs does the membership club eliminate? And third, what is the connection between the farm's location and the club's success? So that was passage 1. Next, passage 2. This is LSAT PrepTest 139, section 3, passage 2. It's about artists going back to old photographic processes like tintypes, daguerreotypes, pinhole cameras. Pretty low difficulty passage. The author's position is pretty clear, and the structure isn't hiding anything, but there is one trap, and I'm going to get to that. Now, this is a humanities passage. The author thinks reviving old photo techniques is not nostalgia for its own sake. These methods recover something real that modern photography gave up, and that is the entire argument. Now, the most important paragraph is paragraph 4, the Estabrook paragraph. That's where the author stops reporting and starts arguing. Everything before that is just setup. Everything after it is payoff. So when you get there, you want to slow down. Now, paragraph 1 is your hook. Jane Hinsbit finds a tintype and falls in love with it. The creamy tones, the detail, the raised surface on iron. She'd been trying to photograph insects, and paper prints weren't cutting it. The tintype gave her what she needed. Read this at a normal speed. Its job is emotional. It's supposed to make you feel the pull of these old processes before the author explains why they matter. Don't overthink it. Just register that the author chose to open with someone being amazed. Then paragraph 2 widens the lens to other people. Photographers everywhere are digging up old recipes, polishing plates, coating paper with egg whites, building pinhole cameras, and the author calls this more like a groundswell. Hold on to that word, it's doing work there. The author is telling you this movement is serious and it's growing, not just a handful of hobbyists in a garage. But the long list of techniques here is just evidence of the scale. You don't need to memorize it. Know that it's there later, so you can go back to it if you need to for a particular question. Now, paragraph 3 gives you the history. They're saying these old techniques died away because they were messy, they were slow, they were inconsistent. Newer methods were cheaper, faster, and gave you more reliable results. So for that reason, the old ones disappeared. Only tintypes survived, barely as a curiosity. You could move through this part quickly, it's just background. But here is what you've got to catch. The author sets up a very specific contrast. The exact qualities that killed these techniques, the unpredictability, the hands-on mess, those are the same qualities pulling artists back to them now. And that twist is the engine of the whole passage. If you read paragraph 3 as just being a history lesson, you're going to miss it. Now, paragraph 4 is where you get your points. Estabrook deliberately seeks out the accidents and irregularities in the old processes and doesn't try to control them. He wants time to leave its mark on every print. And the stains and imperfections that a 19th century photographer would have cropped out, Estabrook chooses to keep them because he wants to heighten the sense of nostalgia. And before that, the author says his work renders it a lost object. So the author's tone here is not calling Estabrook sentimental or gimmicky. He's not rolling his eyes. He's saying this is a deliberate artistic choice with a real purpose. The author respects it. And that tone, of course, is important to know for the questions. Then paragraph 5 connects Estabrook back to the bigger movement. Old techniques give you wildly variable results. That means every single print is one of a kind. It carries the specific mark of one artist's encounter with one moment. And then the author makes his biggest claim. These old methods offer a way to recover an intimacy that mass media has all but overwhelmed. That is the destination the whole passage has been driving toward. Modern photography became mass production, and these artists are therefore reclaiming something personal. Now, the key move here is the reversal. What made old techniques fail is exactly what makes them valuable artistically. They failed commercially, but are viable as art. So that consistency was previously a bug, now it is a feature. You want to know that for the questions, of course. Now, the author's stance is warm and admiring, not neutral, not skeptical, not amused. He thinks these artists are onto something real. The main trap is picking an answer that undersells the author's enthusiasm. To say that they are doubtfully hesitant would be wrong. To say they were ironically amused is also wrong. The author is not smirking, they've bought in on this. Now, before you go to the questions, check yourself on these 3 things. First, why does the author tell you Estabrook keeps the stains instead of cropping them? What is that detail doing in the argument? Second, what is the difference between the way paragraph 3 talks about unpredictability and the way paragraph 4 talks about it? And third, why does the passage end on the mass media instead of ending on the artists themselves? So we're going to leave it here, folks. If you're looking for support with your LSAT prep, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. I'll be back on Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific for my regular daily live Q&A. Anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions. I'll see you all then. Have a great weekend.